Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our live coverage of the latest mission from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. I'm Will Robinson Smith. I'll be conducting our commentary for the duration of this coverage. We're broadcasting from the Spaceflight Now News Bureau here at NASA's Kennedy Space Center. Good afternoon to all of you. If this is your first launch with us of the day so far, we appreciate you stopping by. If you're coming on over from our coverage of the SpaceX Falcon 9 launch of the Starlink 11-9 mission, welcome back. Welcome in. Glad you're sticking around for launch number 2 out of 3 orbital flights that are on deck today. Once again, I want to thank our moderators in the live chat who are helping us out with this live coverage for the flight of an Atlas V rocket. Thanks to Rick Donner and Jeff Hansen for being here with us. And if you do see any of the other mods crews on in, actually I see Aussie Space Girl also hanging out with us at this point. Appreciate the 3 of you. And if you do see any of the other mods beyond that, sure to give them a big old Spaceflight now hello. And we appreciate the little more than 1,700 of you who are joining with us at the top of the broadcast. If you haven't already, you could do us a big favor just by liking and sharing the stream. Allows more folks to find their way into this live launch coverage. We are currently L-1 hour, 56 minutes, 35 seconds and counting to the planned launch of this Atlas V rocket. For those of you who were just with us for the Falcon 9 flight and are more used to just the T-minus clock, because United Launch Alliance employs 2 planned holds within its countdown timeline for its Atlas V rocket. The countdown on the terminal countdown, the T-minus time, is going to be different from the L- clock. The L- clock is counting, just broadly speaking, to liftoff, which is currently aiming for 7 p.m. tonight Eastern, 2300 UTC. The T- clock, which is currently not on your screen, but that is, again, the terminal count. So once it hits T-4 minutes, there will be the final planned hold, and that will last about 15 minutes until ULA verifies that they are go to head into the final 4-minute terminal count, and then the L- clock will sync up with the T- clock and proceed to the final 4 minutes of the count until liftoff. This is United Launch Alliance's first mission of the year so far, the first Atlas V we've seen in a little bit. Also the first flight of Amazon's Project Kuiper satellites. The company has purchased quite a few launch vehicles across multiple providers in order to start building out its satellite internet constellation, and we'll talk much more about that as we cruise on through the count over the course of the next just a little under 2 hours as things currently stand. As you might have guessed, based on the fact that there are 2 planned holds in the count, unlike a Falcon 9 rocket, which uses a load-and-go style of fueling, the Atlas V does have the ability, even though tanking is underway, to hold the count once they hit the terminal countdown point at the final 4 minutes. And if they feel like there are some things they need to troubleshoot, take a little bit of a closer look at, then they are able to pause, work those issues, and recycle the countdown. We saw that happen a number of times during the last launch attempt for this mission back earlier this month. That was due predominantly because the weather was not wanting to play ball. Things looking much more favorable for a launch today. Weather's been oscillating between about, I'd say from what we're hearing, between about 70% and 75% favorable for a liftoff. 45th Weather Squadron forecast a 75% chance of good weather during its most recent published launch weather forecast that was issued yesterday, citing concerns potentially for violations of the cumulus cloud rule and the anvil cloud rule. At the top of the hour, of course, was when when United Launch Alliance passed the L-2 hour mark. Throughout the course of the countdown, they will be releasing weather balloons in order to further assess conditions as they proceed towards the planned liftoff of this Atlas rocket. Per the most recent updates from ULA, the booster's liquid oxygen is now flowing on board the first stage of the Atlas V rocket. The vehicle holds about 48,800 gallons of the oxidizer. You can see just peeking out from the side of the Atlas booster that there are multiple solid rocket boosters that are on board this vehicle. In fact, there are 5 of them, which is why this rocket in its current configuration has the 551 designation, denoting the 5 solid rocket boosters and a medium-length payload fairing. That fairing is about 17.7 feet or 5.4 meters in diameter. With this particular set of fairings on board, this rocket stands about 205 feet or about 62.5 meters in height. 27 Kuiper satellites are on board this particular Atlas rocket. That's the cap for this launch vehicle. For future Vulcan launches of for the Kuiper program, a Vulcan rocket can carry 45 Kuiper satellites on board. And while there are other providers who will be launching Kuiper satellites, we actually don't have a readout at this point as to how many satellites each of those rockets will be able to carry. Amazon has purchased a whole slew of missions to support its constellation, with 38 coming from ULA and its Vulcan rocket. They also purchased 9 Atlas flights from Arianespace. They have 18 Ariane 6 launches, 12 from Blue Origin and its New Glenn rocket, with an option to add an additional 15, up to 15 if they so choose, and 3 Falcon 9 launches from SpaceX. When Amazon booked those SpaceX launches, they said at the time that the plan was to start launching those in the middle of 2025, although as of the last time we reached out to Amazon ahead of this flight, we were not given a definitive answer as to whether or not those SpaceX Falcon 9 Kuiper launches will start as planned in the middle of 2025 or if those will come later. In talking with ULA President and CEO Tory Bruno at a media roundtable at the 40th Space Symposium in Colorado, he did mention that the plan as it stands is to be able to launch a couple of these Kuiper flights on an Atlas rocket before they go ahead and prepare for their first national security mission on a Vulcan rocket. That Vulcan flight, carrying the USSF 106 payload, set to lift off sometime over the summer. Sounds like it's towards the latter part of the summer, which would give the opportunity for another Kuiper Atlas flight, which would have the designation from Amazon's perspective as KA-02, or Kuiper Atlas 2. ULA uses a slightly different naming system for its Kuiper launches. This one is referred to as just Kuiper 1. Taking a look at our live chat as we cruise on through here with this countdown. Want to thank our wonderful channel member community for making this coverage possible. A big thanks to Cumulus Granatus, Lloyd Green, Mike Barnfiend, Joni Mahoney, Christopher Cole, Kari, and many others. Channel membership comes with a number of perks, including discounts at our online shop. That is shop.spaceflightnow.com. Access to member-only videos here on YouTube, access to our members-only Discord server, and of course the ability to watch all of our live launch liftoff moments from here at the Cape in 4K. And we will have our usual crew out here getting ready to support this mission. Our friend Pete Carson's with Max Q Productions will be here with us at the press site coming up a little bit later on in the broadcast. Our Adam Bernstein is getting ready to head out over on the Cape side for viewing from that vantage point. Also have our photographer Michael Kane here with us at the Kennedy Space Center press site as well. And I do believe we have our friends Chuck and Jen Briggs shooting this launch with us as well. So look for their perspective on the Atlas rocket coming up a little bit later on in the stream. Taking a quick look now at where this Kuiper mission is going to be flying once it leaves the pad. ULA, fortunately, as they typically do with their Atlas and Vulcan launches, created a nice little visibility map to give you an idea of, after liftoff, how long it will take and how far the rocket will be once it does leave the pad at Space Launch Complex 41. Update on the fueling process for this Atlas rocket. About 30% of the Centaur LOX tank has been filled. Upper stage of the Centaur is powered by a combination of liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen. First stage is fueled by a combination of liquid oxygen and RP1, a rocket fuel or a rocket grade kerosene. Per ULA, today's flight, or today's planned flight, I should say, will be the 275th launch of a Centaur vehicle over the course of its various iterations. going back to November of 1963. Upper stage is powered by an RL-10 engine manufactured by Aerojet Rocketdyne, which is now an L3 Harris Technologies company. Actually, in just the last minute or so, the upper stage LOX tank has reached 75% fill. And at this point, the chill down of the prop lines for the liquid hydrogen on the Centaur upper stage are also now underway. Liquid hydrogen needs to be kept extremely cold at about minus 423 degrees Fahrenheit. As we continue on with the countdown, just want to remind folks, if you have a comment or question about this mission or other goings on in the realm of space and space flight, you can use the YouTube Super Chat feature. And not only will you be giving us some interesting things to talk about as we cruise on through the count, but you'll be supporting what we do here at Spaceflight Now, and that, my friends, is always greatly appreciated. Now L minus 1 hour, 39 minutes, 29 seconds and counting. The countdown timeline for an Atlas V rocket starts long before the vehicle is in the process to begin prop load. Let's go ahead and step back through the countdown timeline, let you know the milestones that have passed and what is still coming up here in the next hour and 39 minutes. Called stations and the start of the countdown began at about L minus 6 hours and 50 minutes at 12:10 p.m. Eastern today. The next big milestone came a few hours after that at L minus 2 hours and 30 minutes. That's when the start of the planned 15-minute hold got underway. Again, because ULA employs 2 planned 15-minute holds, the countdown, the terminal clock is separate and distinct from the L- clock up until the final 4 minutes of the count. That hold was released a little bit after the chill down of the LOX lines began, preparing for liquid oxygen to start flowing on board the Atlas booster. Count had picked up at L- 2 hours and 15 minutes. That was just about 4:45 this afternoon. About 10 minutes after that, that's also when the Centaur LOX transfer lines began to be chilled. About 10 minutes after that is when Centaur LOX load began at L- 2 hours and 5 minutes, or about 4:55 p.m. this afternoon, T- 1 hour and 50 minutes. Atlas LOX load began about 10 minutes after that at L- 1 hour 55 minutes. And then the most recent milestone that just came up was the start of the chill down of the Centaur LH2 transfer lines. That began just a couple minutes ago. Approaching another milestone here, Centaur LOX topping, which is actually what they're just now getting into, according to ULA. I'll throw in the caveat at this point that ULA doesn't publish its full fueling timeline ahead of an Atlas mission, so bear with me. This is a little bit of approximation with some of these milestones based off of the reconstruction of the timeline that we saw during the first Kuiper 1 mission launch attempt that was scrubbed due to weather. Centaur RL-10 engine chilldown begins about L- 1 hour and 20 minutes, or about T- 1 hour and 5 minutes, coming up here at about 5:40 p.m. Eastern. That'll be followed by Centaur liquid hydrogen load begins just before the hour mark on the L- clock. Atlas liquid oxygen entering into topping a couple minutes after that. Moving right along, Centaur liquid hydrogen topping hits at right about L- 45 minutes. Then at about L- 25 minutes to somewhere L- 20 minutes, they'll conduct a final weather briefing before they go ahead and cruise on into the terminal count, which picks up at L- 19 minutes or T- 4 minutes. And this is the final planned hold that is incorporated into the countdown. And again, once they get into this terminal count hold, that's when they make their final assessments to determine if they are ready to proceed into the terminal count. And if, like last time, there's a weather issue that they need to wait out a little bit longer, they have a 2-hour window today, as they did last time. So a little bit of a buffer if they need to recycle the count and make another run at it. Once that hold lifts, the L- clock and the T- clock come into sync. The ignition of the RD-180 engine at the base of the Atlas booster will ignite at about L- or T- 2.7 seconds, and liftoff of the Atlas V rocket actually happens 1 second after T0. Just about an hour and a half to go before the planned liftoff of this Atlas V rocket. Once again, we are counting down as things stand right now to a 7 o'clock liftoff of this vehicle, and expect this Atlas V to move with some pretty good speed, given the fact that there are 5 solid rocket boosters on board this vehicle. ULA's CEO Tori Bruno has also given nicknames to all the configurations of the Atlas vehicles. This one flying today with the length of fairing as well as the 5 solids, which gives the 551 designation, is nicknamed the Bruiser. Currently L minus 1 hour, 27 minutes, 39 seconds and counting. A little bit bright, so a little bit hard to make out, but you're starting to see some venting there from the liquid oxygen as it's flowing on board the Atlas V. Loading on board both the booster and the Centaur upper stage. At this point, the Centaur upper stage is in LOX topping, so as liquid oxygen continues to boil off, they will continue adding more and more to keep it at flight levels. Next major milestone is coming up in the next few minutes, which will be the chill down of the RL-10 engines. The RL-10 engine, I should say, on the second stage. Now L minus 1 hour, 24 minutes and counting. Want to take a look back at some of the views there at the pad level as United Launch Alliance was preparing for this mission. Of course, in the time that they stood down from launching back earlier this month to getting ready for this flight now, they decided to roll the rocket back from the pad into the vertical integration facility, which meant they needed to roll the rocket back out and prepare it for its mission that you're seeing coming up here, planned for 1 hour, 24 minutes from this point. Let's begin our tour of the pad with a Tory time lapse, as the CEO lovingly likes to call these. Look at the rollout of the Atlas V rocket as it made its way to sync up with the systems there at the pad. Now looking at some video that I shot earlier today at Space Launch Complex 41. A nice little bop around this launch site and look at the various details of this Atlas V rocket emblazoned with the Amazon logo. We're going to be seeing that a lot from ULA launches moving forward, as there are 7 more Atlas launches with a payload consisting of Kuiper satellites and 38 Vulcan launches. All of these missions will have 5 solid rocket boosters as far as the Atlas missions are concerned. You can see the nozzles of those 2 of those solid rocket boosters there at the base of the Atlas booster. Photographers were out busily setting up their remote cameras to capture this rocket as it makes its flight. While the cost per mission for Amazon to buy all these ULA Atlas rockets has not been made public. It did allow ULA to invest quite a bit in its infrastructure here at the Cape and create an avenue for a second lane. So the current VIF will be used for Atlas missions as well as government-focused Kuiper launches, or excuse me, government-focused Vulcan launches. And the second VIF, VIF A, will be used explicitly for its Vulcan vehicles as well. Amazon, of course, has also been investing heavily in its footprint here at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, as well as the Kennedy Space Center, where over at the former shuttle landing facility, now the Space Florida launch and landing facility, they built up their payload processing facility that you can see pictured here. We had the good fortune to attend the groundbreaking ceremony and a ribbon cutting as some of the steel beams were raised, and this was just a framework the last time we got to see this in person. Hopefully we'll be able to go back and take a closer look for ourselves in the not too distant future now that this facility is in work. Taking a look inside, you can see the payload fairings for the Atlas rocket as this vehicle was readied before the payload fairings were transported out to the pad at Space Launch Complex 41. Here's an image of those fairings rolling out and beginning their journey out to Slick 41. These images were captured the first go-round ahead of the planned April 9th launch of the Kuiper 1 mission. Of course, that was before weather decided to play spoiler to the whole affair, and ULA and Amazon had to stand down from that launch opportunity, and now we are awaiting the planned flight coming up here in just about an hour and 20 minutes. Speaking of things that are moving along according to plan, the first stage liquid oxygen tank has now reached the 60% mark. 60% on the Atlas booster for the liquid oxygen. The RP-1 that is on board the Atlas booster is loaded shortly after the vehicle arrives at the pad. That happens the day prior to launch, typically. And right on schedule. Now we're just a little past L minus 1 hour, about 18 and a half minutes. The chill down of the RL-10 engines is underway per ULA. The company uses liquid nitrogen to cool the engine pumps and make sure they're at the correct temperature before ignition. That RL-10 engine powering the Centaur upper stage will ignite at about T plus 4 minutes and 39 seconds into the mission. As far as the views that we'll see during this whole operation once the Atlas rocket leaves the pad, at the request of the customer, Amazon, we won't be getting views of those Kuiper satellites. Amazon has been quite protective of any visuals regarding those satellites at this point in time. So unless the company releases images of them post deployment and once checkouts have gone successfully, likely won't get our first view of a Kuiper satellite for a little while yet still. So the last known milestone that has been published for this mission is the conclusion of the first burn of the Centaur upper stage, which will wrap up at about T plus 18 minutes 14.9 seconds post liftoff. In an update in the last few minutes from ULA President Tory Bruno, he notes that the board is green, that they are working no issues, the wind levels are good. However, because there's always a however, right? He does note that there is an anvil cloud heading in the direction of the pad. And a little tongue-in-cheek end to his post says, "Everybody face west and aggressively exhale." And as we're all taking that deep breath and preparing for things to come, we are seeing the Falcon 9 rocket there at Launch Complex 39A is now starting to go upright. You'll notice this is a very shiny Falcon booster. That's because this is the first flight of this particular booster, whose tail number we are not 100% assured on. We're going to try to see if we can punch in with our cameras a little bit later on to see if we can spot the tail number on this booster, though it's believed to either be B1091 or B1094. If we get an answer to that over the course of this broadcast, we'll let you know, but we are tracking the progress of this Falcon 9 rocket as SpaceX is planning for a launch of the Starlink 12-10 mission using this vehicle coming up at 10:31 p.m. Eastern, 02:31 UTC later on tonight. As was the case with the Vandenberg launch, and as is the case currently with this Atlas mission, we will have dedicated live coverage of the flight of this Falcon 9 rocket once it is ready to launch. So be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel here if you haven't already. Click the bell icon. Make sure you've got notifications turned on. So if we do have a bit of a gap between this flight and the one on the left-hand side of your screen, then you can go ahead and be made aware when we do start our live coverage, which will begin about an hour prior to liftoff. In the latest update from ULA's launch blog, they don't explicitly mention that anvil cloud that Tory Bruno mentioned in his post, so we'll continue to track that as certainly a possibility, but as of now, they are continuing to move towards a liftoff as things currently stand at 7 p.m. Eastern from Pad 41. Launch weather officers with the 45th Weather Squadron apparently tracking an 80% chance of good weather for today's mission. Again, that anvil cloud notwithstanding, or certainly factored in there. Anvils are tricky because they're essentially an extension of a thunderstorm and could make the impact of lightning a possibility, which is why they track the presence of those anvil clouds so closely. Another fueling update for you. The last of the 4 prop tanks that had not yet begun loading, the Centaur liquid hydrogen tank load, has now begun. That upper stage LH2 tank holds about 12,300 gallons of that cryo. Little less than an hour and 12 minutes to go before the planned liftoff of this Atlas rocket. Taking a look at our live chat here, I want to thank the 2,700 of you who are watching with us live this late afternoon, early evening, however you want to think about it. If you haven't already, you could do us a big favor just by clicking the like button and sharing the stream. Lots more folks to find their way into this live launch coverage. I want to thank channel member Jim Fowley for being a member with us here for now 9 months, asking, is there another launch tonight? Yes, sir, there is. And you're taking a look at the rocket that's going to be supporting it in the big box on your screen at this moment. As the Starlink 12-10 mission, launch of 23 Starlink V2 mini satellites, 13 of which feature direct-to-cell capabilities. Another fueling update for y'all. The first stage liquid oxygen tank is now 90% full. Now roughly L minus 1 hour, 7 minutes, 20 seconds and counting. Latest fueling milestone, the first stage liquid oxygen tank is now complete. ULA is moving into topping. As you can see, simultaneously, SpaceX is bringing its Falcon 9 rocket into the upright and launch position there at pad 39A. Things continue to flow smoothly, both literally and figuratively, on the Atlas rocket there on the right-hand side of your screen. As we're just now approaching the final hour ahead of the planned flight of ULA's Atlas 5 rocket there on the right-hand side of your screen, and SpaceX is bringing its Falcon 9 rocket upright. Want to bring in someone who is acutely familiar with both of these launch vehicles, and as we're preparing to see the continuation very much of one satellite internet constellation and the dawn of another, want to bring in via voice our friend Mr. Jonathan McDowell, an astute astronomer and expert orbital tracker of all things whizzing around our little blue marble. Jonathan, it's good to speak with you today. How are you, my friend?
Great to be here. Yep, it's been a long day already, and excited to finally see Kuiper get its chance.
Yeah, and just speaking of the kind of day it's been, obviously we're coming off of one Falcon flight going straight into an Atlas, and then just a few hours afterwards another Falcon launch, which is Reading, as we're all seeing here on the screen. It's quite a poignant moment in time for the state of things for satellite internet constellations, would you say?
Absolutely, and we earlier today we also had the second launch of the Long March 5B with a Xingwang constellation payload on, just a few minutes before the Starlink one. So this is going to be Kuiper's going to be the third mega constellation launch today, and that just, I think, tells you where we are. As you said, it's 2025, I think, the last few years have been the years of Starlink in space launch. This year is the year when we see the expansion to many different constellations.
And as these various constellations are, some burgeoning, a lot of others starting to build out, like Eutelsat's OneWeb in addition, are we starting to see as well a fight for some of the, not only available, literal space in low Earth orbit, but also some of the communication bandwidth as well, some of those valuable Ka band space. I mean, how is that sharing starting to play out?
Right. I think there's a lot of competition. I'm not really an expert on the radio frequency spectrum stuff, but certainly I think there's a lot of uncertainty about the right technical mix. And yes, as you say, Starlink has mainly been using Ku band. It has its direct to cell payloads, which may or may not be working well. We have then, yeah, Ka band coming along, and which has its own issues, but yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see how successful the interference mitigation measures are going to be when you have all of these different mega constellations.
And just focusing for a minute on Project Kuiper, given that this is the first time we're seeing the production version of those satellites launch, we're about a year and a half after the proto flight mission with just two of those test satellites that went up into low Earth orbit and then were deorbited. Were you surprised to see how much time it's taken for Amazon to get to this point where they are now, starting the launches of these production satellites and, hoping to start building a cadence with its, launch providers?
Yeah, I mean, I think it fits with, Bezos's other venture, right, Blue Origin, which has also been very much in the slow and steady pace, right? But certainly it's a concern that they've spent so much time developing this system while Starlink has been getting customers. And so I think they really and we haven't seen a lot as well about how they're going to roll out their system, not just in terms of satellites, but in terms of ground stations of terminals to customers. And so they've got a big gap to catch up to try and get some of Starlink's customer base.
And just given the beginning of the rollout process that we're starting to see here, it'll still be a little while yet before they're able to begin customer service. At one point they were hoping to start service back in 2024, and now presumably at the back end of 2025, once they've got enough of these Kuiper satellites on orbit in the various shells. Just given the number of contracts that SpaceX and its Starlink franchise have been able to book out via, airlines, via, cruise ships, cargo ships, high-speed rail, like we're seeing with the Brightline, for example, here in Florida. Do you think that Amazon's kind of avenue is looking for pockets that SpaceX hasn't necessarily delved into, or do you think they're going to try to compete head-to-head and try to, take some of the pie that SpaceX and Starlink are currently occupying?
I think it's going to be a bit of both. I think initially they'll look for big corporate customers, perhaps, but they really have to, I think, convince more broadly that they have something that, how to say, that they can offer something that Starlink can't. Right? The question is, can Kuiper provide a service that is either higher quality or easier to use? And if they can do that, then they can have a hope of breaking into that market.
And I'll just note for the audience, we're just a little bit under an hour to the planned launch of this Kuiper mission. As you mentioned, Atlas LOX topping is underway. The next milestone that we're watching for coming up here at about L-45 minutes with Centaur liquid hydrogen topping. And then about 20 minutes after that, there will be another weather briefing as we're tracking that pesky anvil cloud that apparently is tracking towards us, which, ULA already ran into weather issues once. Hopefully they don't get snuffed by that again. But, Jonathan, bringing you back into the conversation here, when Amazon came out with its announcement of its massive launch purchase over the course of a few years, first with the 9 Atlases, then the 38 Vulcans, more than a dozen Ariane 6, a dozen New Glenn, and topping off with 3 Falcon 9 missions. Did it make sense to you, or were you surprised at sort of the launchers that they chose and the order that they chose it, or just given sort of the landscape of the launch environment at the time and given what they were trying to do with Kuiper, that it was sort of logical to go with ULA since SpaceX predominantly was busy with its own Starlink constellation launches?
Right. I mean, I think to the extent that they didn't want to be dependent on SpaceX, because they do see them as a rival, it made sense to go for other providers. Um, there and there is a big question as to whether ULA can really deliver on the cadence that they need, particularly as ULA's focus is always, being on the government launches. My worry is that, if it's a choice between slipping a Kuiper mission and getting a national security mission off on time, ULA are going to prioritize the national security mission, right? So I think it'll be great to see this one go off. Let me see 4 or 5 go off and see what cadence they're really able to get on launching on these rockets. And that's where SpaceX have really demonstrated just a remarkable ability to keep firing these things up.
And that's really going to be one of the tricky things, I think, for Kuiper Systems LLC, which is getting enough of these satellites into low Earth orbit in time, since they've got an FCC requirement to launch and have in operation half of their constellation of more than 3,200 satellites, and they've got a little more than a year to do that. Does that, given how
Yeah, I think it's
busy
really
things
tight.
are?
I think it's really tight, and the word is that I mean, it's not just the launches, right? It's building the satellites and whether they can build enough satellites in time and ship them to the pad in time. And so I know it's possible, it's not inconceivable, but I think they've got a big challenge on their hands, and with the limited amount of tests they've been able to do so far. Yeah, they had their 2 prototype satellites. Are they going to have are these operational satellites going to be trouble free? All it would take is one sort of generic design problem to sort of throw itself up to give you a 6-month delay in redesigning something, right? So I think that they've really got to get lucky if they're going to deploy on the cadence that they really need to reach. And so I think that's going to be just very interesting to see how much they're able to keep to that schedule.
And where these satellites are going to be operating at 590 kilometers, 610 and 630 respectively.
Right.
How do you sort of think about those particular altitudes as the choices for Amazon and its constellation?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, so it's a little higher than Starlink, right, which is more like 550. So these are more like 600. It's well below OneWeb and the Chinese constellations, which are picking sort of more 1,000 to 1,200 kilometers. So I don't like the ones that go to those high orbits, because if things go wrong, you're stuck with space debris for centuries. So good for Kuiper for going lower than that. Even so, it's a very crowded part of space. And maybe 600 is a little less crowded than 550, even discounting the Starlinks. But there's a lot of Chinese satellites at that altitude too. SpaceX have been starting to move a bunch of their satellites down from 550 to more like 450, partly because of the crowding at 550. So one thing I haven't heard anything about, right, is Kuiper's plans for collision avoidance and whether they're doing sort of similar things to Starlink in terms of automated collision avoidance, and how well they're going to be able to operate that. So yeah, it's a generic altitude for mega constellation satellites in the 500, 600 kilometer range. It's at the upper end, but it's contributing to the overall crowding of low Earth orbit.
And given SpaceX's long-term goals for its Starlink constellation, having eventually tens of thousands of Starlinks on orbit, and I imagine Kuiper will want to expand beyond its current allotment of 3,200 and some change. How do you think, obviously, like you just sort of alluded to, creating really robust and comprehensive collision avoidance protocols is going to be really key here, but with such a congested sandbox, how much more expansion can LEO really take before it becomes, really a more pronounced problem, both for satellites and, potentially eventually for, human spaceflight?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's already a problem. I think it is interesting, as you say. The first round of mega constellation filings in the US with the FCC, right, were all of the order of a few thousand. And then there was this second round where SpaceX asked for 30,000, and some other entrants that asked for several thousand. And Amazon was noticeably absent from that second round. They partly because they weren't ready yet. But they're still on this first generation round of only 3,000. And it's really unclear to me how many you really need. Like, does SpaceX really need 30,000? Or are they just, trying to cover some sort of squeeze out competition? Is 3,000 enough for Kuiper? Can they provide better service with more satellites? And so I think these things are going to shake out in the next few years. And yeah, there's some real problems already with the system in place. I mean, one problem is that when they launch these mass satellites, 20 at a time, it takes the Space Force ages to catalog them because they can't tell which satellite is which for a while. And so right now we've had I mean, let's see, one, two, three, four. Like the last 5 or 6 launches haven't gotten any two-line elements out yet from Space Force because they're still sorting them out. And so as more and more of the launches become mega constellation launches, the catalog is more and more out of date unless we can find a regime where satellites can be cataloged as soon as they're launched by some new mechanism, and so the system is just not coping very well with the number of spacecraft that are being placed in orbit right now.
Yeah, no, it's certainly becoming problematic and potentially problematic as we're looking at this wide shot of Pad 41. You can see some of those cumulus clouds that are making themselves known. As Tori Bruno was mentioning a little bit earlier in the count, there is an anvil cloud that has been tracking towards the pad that we're hoping. Actually, just speak of the devil. I've got an update from Tori Bruno now. The anvil cloud losing energy, so hopefully that won't be a limit to launch coming up here in just about 50 or so minutes. Jonathan, going back to the sort of the promise and the functionality of the Kuiper satellites, one thing that kind of jumped out at me that maybe is something that Amazon is really going to be leaning on is at the Space Symposium and also at the Space Force Association conference that was late last year, that Amazon Government Solutions, a distinct company by legal standards, was there and very much making their presence known as an option for government customers, and really making it clear that the Kuiper satellites sort of have an all-in-one bundleness to them, that unlike the distinction between Starlink and Starshield, they've got this one satellite that can have this sort of duality to it. So, as you're thinking about the marketplace for Kuiper, is that how does that sort of factor into your thinking of what Amazon may be angling for long term?
Yeah, no, it certainly does suggest they're focusing on to some extent on the U.S. market and the U.S. government market. One of the problems, right, if you say, oh, we've got our government, including defense capability on the same satellite as my public capability, that's going to make it harder to get landing rights, to get transmission rights in other countries, right, which are going to be less
Hmm.
willing to allow service from a satellite that's perceived, if it's perceived as a military satellite or as a satellite serving the military. So I think it's not clear that that's a smart move on Amazon's part.
And so as we kind of look to the back half of 2025, we've got this launch on deck, and Tori Bruno has said that they may be able to launch one more Kuiper Atlas before they have to, as we were just talking about, pivot over to their national security customer in the U.S. Space Force for that mission on a Vulcan rocket. Um, what are you anticipating for the future of Kuiper in 2025? Do you think they will be able to find enough launch room to get to a service area or a service position if they can squeeze in maybe one or two more Kuiper Atlas missions and at least one Vulcan?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, I think it's plausible to see four Kuiper launches this year. And so then you've got, 80-ish satellites working and 8,200. And so that's enough to do at least a limited beta service, perhaps. And so I think they're by the end of 2025, they'll have satellites on orbit. They'll be, running communications through them. They'll be able to do some things. I don't think they'll have the full service, and so I think that's much more into 2026.
And by that point, obviously, SpaceX. I mean, I believe the latest stats on your tracking had them at, was it 7,200 and a little bit more than that currently with Starlink on orbit. I mean, add another 6 months to that, and we'll be probably at about what 7,600 at least Starlinks on orbit by then, if not well beyond that.
Right. I mean, before the launches today, what was the let's see, lost my count. Yeah. There were 7264 satellites in space. And that's incredible. The total number of Starlinks that have been launched is over 8,300, and they've 1,000 have come down, right? So that's how far along Starlink are. They're well into their replacement of the first generation satellites with second generation ones. And so that just gives you a sense of what a lead they have right now.
Mm-hmm. Just, I guess, as we're starting to wind down our conversation, just thinking about the future, talking about the future of Kuiper, thinking about the future of Starlink. Once Starship starts flying and is able to deploy the Generation 3 Starlink satellites, which are considerably larger than their Starlink V2 mini counterparts, do you think that may help to decongest some of LEO by having larger satellites with more capacity? They can afford to have fewer of them on orbit to do the same amount of work? Or do you think SpaceX has the numbers that are available to them, and so they're going to just run with what they can get away with?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, my gut is that the SpaceX are just going to keep on launching, and that we will see these enormous numbers of satellites, and they're just going to be many of them and bigger. And so we'll ultimately the economics will decide that, right? If they find that they can get more customers and they can use the capacity, then they'll keep launching. And I think with the government applications that have started to come in, whether they launch that many Starlinks or whether they pivot to a smaller number of Starlinks but more Star Shields, There's going to be a lot of stuff up there coming up there from SpaceX. Uh, and so, yeah, we're going to see a very crowded low Earth orbit. I think we will start to see things go wrong at some level, but whether it'll be bad enough that it affects the bottom line enough to sort of really change how people do business, that's less clear. And so yeah, I think we'll see. I mean, the other player that we haven't mentioned, right, that's sort of significant is ASTS, ASD and Science from Texas, who have the Bluebird satellites,
Mm-hmm.
which are a rival more to Starlink's direct-to-cell system. And so we're seeing a number of different rival companies going for different segments of the market. And I think that's yeah, I can't predict what's going to happen, right? We'll see. What I predict is we'll see a lot of these different companies bringing their products to at least experimental service over the next year or two, and then the market will decide which of them survive.
Yeah, and just to wrap things up, one last question, just hitting off of the point you were just making of the sort of crystal ball of it all. Um, given the number of players that are coming in and the proliferation of their various constellations, thinking of how those will work in concert with some of the more legacy, larger geosat guys, thinking like Viasat, for example, you know, thinking ahead to say 5 years down the road, what do you think our satellite internet world is going to be like at that point?
Right, exactly. And one of the big questions is Eutelsat OneWeb scandal that combining a smaller number of LEO satellites with a handful of big, powerful geo satellites, will that be a better mix, a more sustainable mix than the scads and scads of LEO ones that SpaceX is going for? And I think that really depends on whether the latency ends up being really important for customers, right? And so what you can't get with the geo satellites is the very quick response time if you're maybe playing a video game or doing an ATM transaction. And so if enough of the customers really need that, that will sustain the LEO market. If more of the market is, people just watching cat videos or something on the internet, then it's they don't need that latency, and the Eutelsat approach will win out. And so I think we just have to see. But historically, in communications, the rule has always been the more bandwidth you have, the more ways people will find to use it. And so there may well be enough demand generated for at least several of these providers to survive.
It'll certainly be interesting to watch, and we are very fortunate that you'll be watching it all alongside us. Jonathan McDowell, thank you so much for joining us for the broadcast. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And for our audience here, we are now a little bit under 39 minutes to the planned launch of this Atlas V rocket, as the Anvil cloud that we've been watching has been losing some steam. Things are seemingly in a good position for a liftoff here, coming up in just about 38 and a half minutes. Also starting to get some views from our photographer Adam Bernstein over at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. Got a nice view of the Atlas V rocket there. You can see one of those fuel tanks just off the the far side of the camera here, just beyond the tree line with the ULA logo on it. Coming up, the next milestone that we're watching for is going to be one more weather brief before ULA heads into the terminal count. And again, that will be when the count, or the T-minus clock hits T-minus 4 minutes, and there will be a final planned 15-minute hold where United Launch Alliance will make their final assessments to see if there are any technical issues that need to be worked out or any sneaky weather issues that may crop up between now and then. And just to put a button on one of our previous streams, the launch of the Starlink 11-9 mission, we do have confirmation now from SpaceX that those 27 Starlink satellites have now deployed. Taking a look at our live chat here, want to thank the now 4,800 of you who are with us live this evening, as we're just a little more than half an hour away from the flight of this Atlas 5 rocket in the 551 configuration. If you haven't already, you could do us a big favor just by clicking the like button and share the stream. Allow us more folks to find their way into this live launch coverage today. Also want to thank our moderator, Clisty Lee, for joining us today, and also for gifting 10 Spaceflight Now memberships. Really appreciate that generosity, Clistia. And thanks for growing our little member community here on YouTube. And to our 10 newest gifted channel members, welcome aboard. We're glad to have you all with us. If you haven't already, be sure to thank Calistia in the live chat, and we hope you decide to stick around with channel membership. Also want to welcome in new channel member only Bob127. Welcome aboard to you. Thanks as well goes out to channel member and moderator Jeff Hansen for a $10 super chat. Appreciate that, Jeff, who says, "Go Cape, go Amazon, go ULA, go Kuiper, Godspeed Atlas 5." And Darren Cobb with a $10 super chat as well. Really appreciate that, Darren. Or excuse me, Daryl. My apologies, Daryl. As we're gearing up for our second rocket launch of the day, go ahead and let us know where you're checking in from. See, George Williams is popping in from the Treasure Coast, just a little bit south of us here in Florida. June Lamelza joining us from Kissimmee in Central Florida. And Willow's mom, aka Zeus's mommy, checking in from about 6 hours inland from the Virginia Beach area. Go ahead and bring up, as we're closing in on about 30 minutes ahead of liftoff. Here's a look at the visibility map as the rocket makes its ascent heading in a northeasterly trajectory. Lifting off from Space Launch Complex 41. You can see, thanks to this graphic from ULA, the timing of the events that we're going to be watching for. So The payload fairings will be jettisoned within the first circle within about 30 seconds. Solids will be jettisoned pretty close to post liftoff. And you can see booster engine cutoff and MES1. That'd be the ignition of the RL-10 engine on the Centaur upper stage. Just about 30 minutes left to go before the planned liftoff at 7 o'clock tonight. Want to thank Space Cadet Zach for a very generous $20 super chat. Really appreciate that. And of course, Spaceflight is certainly a business that is chock full of traditions and good luck superstitions. So, teeing that up for his comment saying, not sure why this is relevant at all, but my ULA coworkers told me to heat up 5 taquitos with tom yum sauce before launch to ensure a successful mission. Well, fingers crossed that does the trick for today's flight, and I think you're starting to make a lot of us hungry here. So, hope you enjoy the launch coverage as we're cruising in to the final 30 minutes as things are planned now for the liftoff of this Atlas V rocket. At this point, ULA is also in what's called the fuel fill sequence, releasing some of the RP-1 kerosene into the RD-180 main engine ahead of its ignition just a few seconds before liftoff. Time now L minus 21 minutes 38 seconds and counting. We do have a new T0 of 7:01 p.m. 23:01 UTC for our friends around the world. We do have confirmation that they entered into the planned hold. Now this happened at was L minus 19 minutes originally heading into a 7 o'clock liftoff. However, they noted that they would be adjusting their countdown clock for a liftoff at 7:01, which is why you see our clock at L minus 19 minutes and 19 seconds right now. Now just under 17 minutes to go to the current T0. Looking at liftoff at 7:01 p.m. Eastern, 23:01 UTC. Taking a look at our super wide shot here at the press site, you can see this band of clouds that is fortunately moving towards us here at the press site and away from the pad there. They're about with about 15 and a half minutes to go. Want to give you an idea of the mission path for this Atlas 5 rockets. Let's go ahead and employ a ULA created mission animation, again up to the point where we will stop seeing views of the Atlas 5 rocket once it makes its ascent.
Following final confirmation of rocket readiness, the RD-180 engine and 5 GEM-63 solid rocket boosters ignite to produce more than 2 million pounds of thrust, lifting ULA's Atlas 5 rocket away from the pad. Shortly after liftoff, the rocket begins a pitchover to attain the proper flight path while minimizing the dynamic pressure it experiences during flight. Atlas then reaches Mach 1, the speed of sound. The addition of 5 solid rocket boosters, or SRBs, precisely augment the liftoff thrust of the Atlas V, giving it the power to deliver the payload to orbit. With their propellant expired approximately 96 seconds into ascent, the SRBs burn out, followed by jettison. Atlas's guidance system then begins steering towards the precise target in space. Amazon's Kuiper satellites are encapsulated inside a 5-meter diameter payload fairing, which provides protection to the spacecraft during ascent. After crossing the Kármán line, entering space, the payload fairing is jettisoned. With the majority of propellant expended fighting against the force of gravity, the RD-180 engine shuts down and the booster stage separates. The rocket then begins second stage flight, weighing less than 7% of what it did at liftoff. ULA's high-performance Centaur, with its RL-10 engine, ignites, powering the upper stage and spacecraft into a circular low Earth orbit. The first burn comes to an end with engine shutdown, followed by Centaur orienting into the proper position to release Amazon's Project Kuiper satellites to begin building their low Earth orbit satellite broadband network.
And appreciate ULA for that overview of the Kuiper 1 mission. This will be the first of 8 remaining Kuiper flights. Eight remaining Kuiper Atlas flights, I should say. ULA President CEO Tori Bruno says the board remains green, so they're not working any constraints at this point to launch. Got less than 10 minutes remaining in the built-in hold, which will lift at the T-minus 4 minute mark, or when the L-minus clock reaches L-minus 4 minutes as well. Got a nice look at the RD-180 engine at the base of the Atlas booster, as well as the engine bell for the 5 SRBs. Looking inside the Launch Control Center, as you see there just at the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. Looking at the upper right-hand corner of the screen, the probability of violation stands between 20 and 35%. So weather trending at the best end at about 80% favorable. You could see some of the concerns that still remain. Countdown clock remaining at T-minus 4 minutes until we should be hearing the readiness poll coming up here.
Purge flowing Jan 2 to the CISA.
Verified.
OSM, verify the FCO, ROC, and OSM whole power switches are in the proceed position.
Ready to proceed.
RLM, verify red line monitor vent table are in the correct configuration for terminal count. Verified. RC, verify solar radiation acceptable for launch.
Verified. Launch on time verified.
Roger. LC, switch to the ready position. All steps are complete prior to the status check.
We remain in the planned 15-minute hold as we continue towards liftoff. In a few moments, ULA launch conductor Scott Barney will poll the team for the final go to pick up the launch countdown. The launch coordinator conducts the launch team during countdown similar to how a symphony conductor is coordinating an orchestra.
28 engineers are polled to confirm the rocket is ready to proceed. This is the final status check for all Atlas vehicle systems, ground systems, and the payload, as well as the U.S. Space Force Eastern Range. Let's listen in as he performs the poll.
L-8 minutes. L-7 minutes. Status check to proceed with terminal count. Atlas systems, propulsion.
Go.
Hydraulics.
Go.
Pneumatics.
Go.
LO2.
Go.
Water.
Go.
Centaur systems, propulsion. Go. Pneumatics. Go. LO2,
Go.
LH2,
Go.
house gas,
Go.
electrical systems, airborne,
Go.
ground,
Go.
facility,
Go.
RFFTS,
Go.
flight control,
Go.
GCQ,
Go.
op support,
Go.
com,
Go.
availables,
Go.
ECS,
Go.
redline monitor, go, quality,
Go.
op safety manager,
Go.
ULA safety officer,
Go.
vehicle system engineer,
Go.
anomaly chief,
Go.
range coordinator,
Go.
launch director,
You have permission to launch.
proceeding with the count. ALC, verify T0 is set for 2301 Zulu.
Verified.
Polling is complete and the team is.
And as you just heard, the go for launch has been given, and ULA is approaching the conclusion of this planned 15-minute hold. The countdown clock, the L- clock that you see in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, will sync up with the T- clock here in just a little more than a minute. Coming up on the release of the clock. Let's listen in as they're about to release the hold.
Yeah, and thinking about how big this moment is and how excited we are.
And there you see the countdown clocks have synced up. T- clock is moving in sync with the L- clock. You might notice there's just a hair difference between our clock and what was on the ULA feed. There's just a slight, like a half-second delay from what's coming in the ULA feed. And as we're coming into the final 3 minutes of the count, want to thank the now more than 20,000 of you who are watching with us live today. Really appreciate you being with us today. L- 2 minutes and counting. L minus 1 minute and counting. As a reminder, the RD-180 engine will ignite about 2.7 seconds prior to T0. Liftoff happening 1 second after T0. "30 seconds. "20 seconds.
Go Centaur.
Go KA01.
And here we go in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Engine ignition. And liftoff. Liftoff of Atlas Kuiper 1, the beginning of Amazon's Project Kuiper satellite internet constellation.
Continue to look good. And we've successfully completed our roll program. Hydraulics continue to operate nominally. Mach 1, Atlas 5 is now supersonic. Body rates continue to look good. Engine continues to operate as expected. Throttling back up.
You are hearing Sarah Bailey Glasgow providing launch vehicle ascent data.
We are now 7 miles in altitude, moving at 1,700 miles an hour. Now passing 1 minute into flight. Vehicle continues to pass through the center of the rain track as expected. SRBs continue to operate nominally. Throttling down, engine continues to burn as expected.
SRB jettison is coming up in less than 30 seconds.
Body rates continue to look good. Vehicle is now 1/2 of its liftoff weight. Max Q passing through maximum dynamic pressure. Coming up on SRB burnout. And we have good indication of SRB burnout, 10 seconds from SRB jettison. Throttling back up.
And a good view of SRB jettison in real time.
And we have good indication of jettison of all 5 SRBs. Engine continues to burn normally. We are now 32 miles in altitude, moving at 4,000 miles an hour.
We just heard confirmation
Coming
of
up
the
on 2
solid
minutes
rocket
in
booster
flight.
jettison. These additional motors augmented the thrust at liftoff to give Atlas rocket an extra boost to reach its circular low Earth orbit destination. These SRBs are called GEM 63s, which stand for graphite epoxy motor, and are 63 inches in diameter. The most obvious difference you'll see between Atlas and Vulcan SRBs is the nose cone shape. Vulcan has a conical nose cone, whereas Atlas has a duckbill or ogive shape. We're coming up here on our next mission event, jettison of the payload fairing. Let's listen in to Sarah.
Continues to move down the center of the range track and is moving at 5,300 miles an hour. Body rates continue to operate nominally. And we are now holding acceleration at 2.5 Gs in preparation for payload fairing jettison. And we have activated the Centaur reaction control system. And we have passed the Kármán line. We have exited Earth's atmosphere. Vehicle is now 1/4 of its liftoff weight. And we have good indication of payload fairing jettison. And good indication of CFLR deck jettison. Engine continues to operate as expected.
You can
Flight
just make out
commentator
those
Sarah Bailey
fairing
Glasgow just
jettisons
called-
going just out of frame. Now about 3.5 minutes into the mission, the next milestone is going to be the booster engine cutoff, or BECO, at about T plus 4 minutes and 23 seconds. That'll be followed by booster Centaur separation.
Body rates are smooth. Hydraulics continue to look good. 30 seconds to BECO. Boost phase chill down in progress. Temperatures are operating as expected. EU has gone to open loop control as expected. Engine continues to operate nominally. And we've completed boost phase chill down as expected. And we have good indication of booster engine cutoff. And we have good indication of Centaur separation. Restart on fuel and locks, good staging. Ignition and full thrust. Arlington is running nominally. Steering has been enabled as expected. Engines are continuing to operate as expected.
This is Atlas Mission Control at T+5 minutes. We just heard flight commentator Sarah Bailey Glasgow confirm the successful completion of today's early milestones in today's flight, and all systems.
And with a good start to the mission here for Kuiper Atlas 1, the mission will continue on now with the Centaur upper stage continuing on in a good beginning of its burn. See a helicopter going by the pad. The conclusion of that first burn of the Centaur upper stage's engine will wrap up at about T plus 18 minutes and 14 seconds. Again, at the request of Amazon, that's why we are not seeing any views of the Kuiper satellites themselves. And they cut things off from our views following stage separation. Taking a look at a quick replay here.
Ignition, 2, 1.
Ignition and full thrust. 5 good SRBs.
And liftoff of the United Launch Alliance Atlas V rocket, carrying satellites for Amazon's Project Kuiper internet constellation, marking the start of a new chapter in low Earth orbit satellite connectivity.
EU is now on closed loop control, engaging first throttle segment. And we've completed our pitch program. Engine operating parameters continue to look good. And we've successfully completed our roll program. Hydraulics continue to operate nominally. Mach 1, Atlas V is now supersonic. Body rates continue to look good.
And as we bring things back here to Florida's Space Coast, you've got a nice little souvenir from the liftoff of a rocket powered in part by 5 solid rocket boosters. Nice little remnants of the plume there. Sort of a pseudo cloud that's drifting towards us. Again, because ULA is not continuing on with its broadcast and broadcasting more information about the full timeline for this mission, we don't have a super clear idea of exactly when these satellites are going to be deployed. More than likely, we'll get an update from probably Amazon first, either on their Amazon social media or on Project Kuiper, declaring that the satellites were successfully deployed and the beginnings of the checkout on-orbit process begins. We'll, of course, be watching for future confirmation of that. So according to the ULA blog, they describe the burn of the Centaur upper stage engine as its, quote, single burn of the Kuiper 1 mission, consuming liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen. And they say they're getting good telemetry on the upper stage, velocity more than 12,000 miles per hour at this point. So given that they're describing this as a one Centaur upper stage engine burn, they note on their timeline actually that the burn will conclude at T plus 18 minutes and 14 seconds. So unless there's another burn that they're just not describing, which based off of the language that they used, it doesn't sound like that's the case, we may actually have deployment of these Kuiper satellites sooner than we may have realized. Of course, that won't necessarily change the timeline of when it's announced the deployment of those satellites, or get word from Amazon about how they're operating. That may still have some time before that information comes down. Before we go ahead and close things out with this broadcast today, number 2 out of 3 for us here at Spaceflight Now, and as our guest Jonathan McDowell was noting, the 3rd out of 4 flights for large low Earth orbit constellations. I want to thank a few folks in the live chat today. Our thanks to Michael Baker for a $2 super chat, who says, my son MB3 and I were watching from East Tennessee. Hope you had a good time checking out the launch broadcast. Channel member Mitchell Wilbur with a very generous $20 super chat. Really appreciate that, Mitchell. Who says, good job as usual, everyone. / this stuff never gets old. Have to agree. Don Flea with a $10 super chat. Thank you, Don. Norman Reitzel, one of our channel members, with a $5 super chat as well. Thank you, Norman. Good to see you today. Deb, another channel member with a $5 super chat. Thank you, Deb. And welcome aboard to Justin Godwin, joining us with channel membership at the pad leader level. 2 down, 1 to go for orbital launches here on the continental United States, as both the Vandenberg launch was able to successfully lift off. Kuiper 1 is now well on its way to deploying the first production Kuiper satellites. And now our eyes begin to turn right here to Historic Launch Complex 39A, where coming up here in the next just about 3 hours and 15 minutes, this Falcon 9 rocket set to lift off with 23 Starlink V2 mini satellites on board. Currently tracking a liftoff. Actually, we do have a slight adjustment to that T0, looking at a liftoff at 10:34 p.m. Eastern. 10:34 p.m. Eastern. Slide of just 3 minutes for that mission. That's 0234 UTC for our friends around the world. So go ahead, grab some dinner, grab some water, take a rest, and we'll look forward to joining you back here for our evening nightcap in orbital launches in just a little more than, well, liftoff is in a little more than 3 hours. Our broadcast will begin an hour ahead of liftoff. So go ahead and hit subscribe to the YouTube channel, turn on all notifications, hit that bell so that you'll be alerted when we do start our broadcast in the event that SpaceX makes another adjustment to the T0 and you won't be caught off guard. I want to thank our team here at Spaceflight Now for all their hard work. Thanks to photographers Michael Kane and Adam Bernstein for shooting this this Atlas rocket as it made its flight. They'll be shooting the Falcon 9 in a little bit. There's been a lot of back and forth. I want to thank our friends Pete Karstens with Max Q Productions, as well as to Chuck and Jen Briggs with C&J Images. Our thanks to our wonderful moderators in the live chat who've been holding it down: Callisto Lee, Rick Donner, Jeff Hansen. Aussie Space Girl was with us earlier. Not sure if she is still hanging with us at this point, but appreciate her from earlier. Want to thank our Spaceflight Now editor, Stephen Young, for running the technical operations of the broadcast, which was, I will say, for those of you who were not in the room here, quite a lot to juggle with this launch. So appreciate him literally running around to make this one happen. Most of all, though, want to thank you for wherever you've been watching from. Going to go ahead and stop down and stop talking to make sure I still have a voice for one more live broadcast. Appreciate all of those who have donated to the so-called Will's Holland Tea Fund for that venture. For all of us here at Spaceflight Now, I am Will Robinson Smith. Remember, be good to yourselves, be good to others. We will see you next time, folks, later on tonight. And until then, bye-bye.